The exemption was limited for for research purposes, non-commercial use, when users have local access. The exception was not applied to databases. Then, in 2016, France adopted its exception for text and data mining.
Sources for non-commercial use, and it was limited only to text and data contained or associated with scientific writings. It was also extended to databases, to copyrighted works, and it also covered the communication and storing of processed text and data for the purpose of verification and ensuring quality of research. In 2017, so 1st January 2017, exception for text and data mining entered into force in Estonia. This exception is extended to any persons for non-commercial purposes, but it requires attribution of the sources that served for this text and data mining. It made the exception rather difficult to implement. 1st March of this year, 2018, the exception for text and data mining will enter into force in Germany. This exception covers works as well as databases. Use of databases is qualified as a normal use explicitly by the German Copyright Act. It extends to non-commercial purposes, and again, like in France, the communication and storing of text and data processed for the purpose of text and data mining is permitted for the purposes of verification and quality assurance of research. Without making this overview exhaustive, there are some further legislative discussions in some other member states, and the message here is essentially that without this problem being tackled on the European level, there is increased fragmentation, as all of those exceptions on text and data mining already implemented in the national legislation of some of the member states are different in their scope. So there is already implications for cross-border exchanges and research cooperation in the EU. It's needless to remind that actually many of the European grants for research cooperation in Europe, condition for them is a cross-border cooperation between research institutions in different countries. CEPI being one of such organizations in Strasbourg that cooperates with other partners in 4 other member states of the European Union. Next slide, please. So few main legal characteristics of the research proposal, proposed by the European Commission. So first, it has a mandatory character, this provision. All member states will have to implement it. Secondly, there is a protection against contractual override of this provision. Thirdly, there is some protection against the technical override of this provision. With regard to the scope, next slide please. With regard to the scope of the text and data mining exception, so it permits, the Commission's proposal permits reproductions of copyrighted works and extractions from databases. With regard to beneficiaries, beneficiaries are limited only to research organizations which are non-purpose, or which activities of which are limited to public interest mission. Private-public partnership is permitted only to a certain extent. Conditions. These beneficiaries, so research organizations, should have lawful access for the purposes of scientific research. So this is the main requirement for those organizations. Next slide, please. So with regard to implications, so the first implication is, so this proposal would achieve a level of harmonization, as all member states would have to implement this exception. It would also facilitate cross-border text and data mining activities. So researchers situated in different member states are sure that the same exception is applied in the different member states. Thirdly, it would bridge the regulatory gap with regard to the innovation-driven jurisdictions such as United States, Canada, Japan, Israel, some of which adopted, like Japan adopted a specific text and data mining exception extended also to other users. Then, protection of text and data mining exception against contractual and some technical override will also ensure that effects of the legal norm is not negated by dominant private actors. That is, the purposes defined by the legislators are not overridden by private actors. Tax and data mining exception will not prevent, and this is very important, next slide please, very important point, text and data mining exception does not prevent right holders, so the owners, the makers of databases, from continuing monetizing their databases, their resources, for selling licensing access to them as they do it today. So, reading those articles or downloading any other publications as we do it today will continue to be possible. Then, the text and data mining exception will not change anything. This is also a very important point. It will not change anything for journalists, innovation-driven startups, for public authorities, for example, authorities investigating when there are famous cases of leaked materials and where would public authorities investigate cases of corruption or transparency, public authorities would not be able to use text data mining. So it doesn't change, at the same time, it doesn't change anything for other categories. So only research organizations are concerned today. Thank you. And now I leave it to my colleague.
Very much. Good morning. This is Giancarlo Frozio from CEP as well. And